Thank you. Ni hao. Would you like me to present in English or Chinese? Okay, then I'll present in English. So, thank you very much for having me. To give a quick overview, at least of what we're going to be talking about this afternoon, is really the changes that we see in distribution in China. And when I say we see, it's what I've seen from my past and what I've seen from interacting with all of the customers and the distributors here in China and how we see that evolving. And to kind of give you a little bit of background on who I am, so you kind of know where I am. I am based in Austin, Texas. I have a big cowboy hat, cowboy boots, they're in my bag. And I work for Silicon Labs running their global distribution, which is about 70% of our revenue goes through distribution. And I also run the sales for the US. I have made today, I was actually counting this morning, this is my 48th trip to China. I have worked over the last 12 years. I have worked for NXP and Freescale. I was their chief marketing officer. Prior to that, I worked for TI for 10 years. I was running product lines like OMAP, DaVinci, C5000, C6000 product lines. So I've had a lot of experience working in China, selling to a very, very large base of customers. And that's really what I'm going to be talking about. So, did I just turn it off? Am I pressing the wrong button? Next, there we go. So really, what we're going to be talking about is the role of a distributor. And this is as of China. You should know this, but in case you don't, how a role of a distributor for someone like Silicon Labs helps me as a supplier is Silicon Labs has a sales footprint of maybe 50 people in China. We don't have enough salespeople to geographically cover China. So we use distributors. We have multiple distributors who then obviously service our end customers. The ratio of our scale by using distribution in China is about 50 people in our sales force, which translates to about 1,000 people selling Silicon Labs in China when we leverage our distribution channel. So that's a 20x increase in sales resources by leveraging the distribution channel here, which then obviously carries to the benefit of the customer, who obviously then has geographic coverage where they have a local salesperson who knows our products and obviously technical support who knows our products. If you don't know who Silicon Labs is, we sell highly complex wireless products like Bluetooth, Zigbee, Wi-Fi. We also sell highly complex timing solutions. And we sell isolation and other MCU, 32-bit and 8-bit. All of these products require hand-holding for the customers. So we have to have a distribution channel in China. And what I'm going to talk through is how we see that changing. There we go. Thank you. Oh, back we go. So what you have here is a depiction of how I categorize the three different types of distributors in China. You have your large global distributors like Arrow, Avnet, Future, with generally about more than $10 billion of revenue as a corporation. You have the Asia-wide distributors like WPI, EDOM, WT, generally over $1 billion. And then you have China distributors that are predominantly serving the Chinese market, which in some cases are less than about $1 billion of revenue. What you see here is how they differ from each other. And generally how they differ from each other makes sense. And the reason it makes sense is because if you look at the worldwide distributors, they have the broadest base of suppliers they represent. Therefore, they have the broadest set of products that they have to support in the field, which means when you start looking down through every single one of these items, they have the largest geographic coverage from their sales force in Asia, but also as a supplier, it is the least technical because generally they support so many more lines and their people have to sell so many different products that they're much less technical than distributors that we have locally here in China that have dedicated people who just sell our lines. And this will become important as I build what I think is going to happen in China over the next 5 years. What you also have is really demand creation is much more driven by more design services and technical support from the regional distributors and Asia distributors locally here in China, more so than the global Arrow Avnet futures. Again, this isn't in every single case, but this is what we see across the board. And it makes sense if you really understand the amount of supplier lines that each of these different distributor types support. So that's really the field support, but if you look at online, and if you look at really what's happening there, I think this is probably the area that is the biggest challenge for understanding for a Western company. Because Chinese distribution, they have a lot of IDHs, you have Asia-wide distributors, you have Arrow Avnet. We're familiar with that concept. But in China, you also have the online market. There's DigiKey, Mouser, Arrow.com, which is on your left. You have the APAC online distributors, which essentially are Asia-wide distributors who are also selling on storefronts, online storefronts like WPI here in China. And then you have Taobao Alibaba, which for someone from a Western business culture starts to completely break the mold of my understanding of how things work. And I think that is a challenge for a lot of US and European semiconductor vendors to get their head around, and I'll explain why as I go through this presentation. But one of the big things that's important, these different online vendors differ, really supporting the long tail or the masses. My Chinese wasn't good, but I understand you're talking about the long tail before. But one of the big areas in this is Taobao. When you look at Taobao, I've been in front of a customer selling a 32-bit product portfolio called Kinetis in China, and I was selling against ST. And I sat down in front of the customer, and I said, hey, you should use my products. The customer said, I'm using ST. They've got lower price. And I said, no. All the products I sell, we've matched ST's price. If it's at 10K volume, we've matched the price. We know what their prices are. We've matched everything. And so he sat down and opened up ST, their web page, where it had their 10K pricing for the 32-bit MCU that they were looking at, and then brought up Taobao and showed exactly the same part at 30% less price. And I'm like, well, yes, you don't have continuity of supply. And then he went on to show me, scroll down the page, that there was 1.2 million units of that product in stock at that particular store, at that particular IDH. So the brokers and the IDHs here is a market that's not familiar to any other country in the world outside of China. And that still is something very difficult for a Western culture to get their head around how to sell into. So that's really where we are today. I think if we really look at other big differences from Western selling of semiconductors to what you have here in China, is the Shenzhen market. You guys, I'm sure, know what this is. This is completely unheard of in any other culture that I've worked in. But here, because there's a demand for it, people want, and it's very challenging for people to get low quantity of parts at a reasonable price. And this is what's being created in this culture because of it. 21IC, I think, is one of the best communities that I'm aware of in China. And the thing that's also difficult for to understand, coming from again from a Western culture, is when I look at this, I remember looking on 21IC and seeing that there was millions of people every month talking and answering technical questions around ST 32-bit, around MSP430, around other microcontroller products. And there was a lot of people creating tools for those products. And I assumed that they were working with ST and TI and all these big companies. So I went and visited them, and they said, no, they're shipping 5,000 tools a month, primarily because they saw on the community there was so much interest. So it's an ecosystem of itself. If you combine Taobao with 21IC, community, and online, that really is something that's difficult because it's so different than any other sales channel that I've seen in the world. So, pausing for a second, that's what we see today. If we look at what's happening, where do we see the evolution of this? That's where I think it becomes quite interesting. I think you have a lot of business trends and a lot of technical trends that are pushing this whole space online. So the biggest challenge that distributors have across the board, worldwide, but especially in China, is their margins. So their dollars that they're getting for selling our products, their margins are being squeezed. They're making less money for every piece of silicon they're shipping for a few different reasons. One reason is because you have a lot of suppliers that are selling technical products like Silicon Labs. And I've worked at NXP, Freescale, TI, and it's the same kind of data that I get from there, is that when a direct salesperson from the supplier is interfacing with the customer, they have a 2x, so they can twice as much chance of capturing that customer than with a distributor involved, which makes sense because you have more technical people involved. You have the actual company plus their applications team involved. And it's not Silicon Labs, the statistics is the same across all the companies I've worked for. So again, the reason why a supplier uses distribution is because they need a large geographic coverage. So what's happening is a lot of companies, semiconductor companies, are getting very big because there's a lot more semiconductors being used. They're increasing their sales force, and down the bottom, you see a lot of consolidation that's happening across the semiconductor companies. So what you're getting is you're getting larger economies of scale at suppliers that are then enabling them to not need as much distribution services. For those of you familiar with distribution, TI has gone no demand creation, just fulfillment with all of their distributors. I think there's Broadcom, there's a number of other kind of suppliers that have done the same, primarily because what's happening is the margin pressure is getting squeezed. And of course, when the margin pressure gets squeezed at a distributor, it compounds the problem that they then can't have as many field resources supporting any one supplier. So what happens is the technical resource starts getting watered down. So the effectiveness of those distributors is becoming less in terms of supporting technically that customer. So it is a challenge because it's almost compounding the challenge of having a distribution network that can support complex products for suppliers like TI, Silicon Labs, ADI, the list goes on. So it is a challenge. I think the second large, shift is that now our customers, so Silicon Labs customers, are making a decision on the product they're going to use. Usually around 70% of those people are making decisions before they even talk to us or a distributor. So they're able to find enough information online that they don't need a supplier coming in and they don't need a distributor coming in to help them make that decision. And I think when you look at, I think when you look at the complexity, and I'll cover it in a few slides, when you look at the complexity of trying to make a decision on a semiconductor product, you start realizing that, you do need somebody, but what's happening is a lot of the online tools are taking its place. So the second big phase of change that I see from a business perspective is that China, and I'll leave the China and US tariff discussion out of this conversation because we could have a whole separate presentation on that. But what's happening is China is becoming a lot more important on a worldwide market. And what I mean by that is, what this is a chart of is basically these are global Fortune 500 companies. The blue line is how many US global 500 companies there are inside of the worldwide Fortune 500 companies, and that's the biggest companies by revenue. The red line is Chinese, the number of Chinese companies that are in the Fortune 500 worldwide. China is just about, I would expect next year, to overtake, to have the highest number of global 500 companies in the world. China is expanding and becoming more of a provider of products than a consumer of products when it comes to, I would say, creating domestically and then pushing wide into different regions, and I think from a corporate perspective. And this combined with the next slide, which is China becoming much more of a powerhouse when it comes to semiconductors, both creation and also acquisition of IC products. What you have with both of these two different strong trends and large market shifts is now Asia distributors like WPI, WT, EDOM, who don't really have a footprint outside of Asia, or outside of Asia, are now getting a footprint outside of Asia by having Chinese IC companies needing to have a distribution network outside of China. Also having companies, Chinese companies doing business in all the regions of the world that are very comfortable with Chinese distribution. And it's a shift where I see Chinese distribution now moving into other regions of the world, which were predominantly managed and run by the Arrow, Avnet, and Futures of the world. And this shift is only starting, like it's $70 billion. You guys know the numbers, I'm sure, but it's $70 billion of investment by the Chinese government and private equity firms here in China that are driving IC development that will drive a lot of that momentum for the Asia-wide distributors today. And if we look at really the technical trends that are happening with distribution and also the ability to support suppliers, what you have is you have a few things. On the left is a good depiction of the complexity of choosing a product for a customer. So right now, if a customer wants to choose an MCU, just any MCU, basically there is 20,000 different options of MCUs online today that are existing products that are being sold. These are not products that are end of life. These are not products that are legacy, archive. These are active products today, 20,000. So the ability to choose what product you want means you need to have someone in front of you giving you advice. But what's happening now is you have a lot of search engines. You have Watson, IBM's Watson, and other other AI, artificial intelligence online tools, creating more contextual search, meaning you don't have a Baidu that you type in a word and it just looks for the word. You actually have a contextual search. You ask it a question, it tells you an answer. And in my chief marketing officer world, I've worked a lot in this in the past, and this is real. So what you have now is you have the ability to search 20,000 parts with what you're looking for and be able to get a reasonable answer so that you can actually make those decisions yourself on what's the best part for you. What you also have is applying the same knowledge of that AI into application notes, into data sheets, into white papers, into communities that allows you to ask a question that enables you to get an answer that has context, that is an answer for the question you're looking for, not just a textual comparison to what's in all of these documents. I think the other thing that's happening is a lot of companies are really working hard on a robust live support model where you have one person or multiple people in one location that you basically phone in, so it reduces the need for external face-to-face resources. I don't think engineers all of the time really want to see people anyway, so that works for them. You also have communities, which is a big topic. Communities becoming a lot easier to search. As I mentioned when I talked about 21IC, there's millions and millions and millions of line items of text and line items of code that you have to search through. But a lot of the tools that they're implementing with AI allows you, again, to find those answers a lot quicker. And if I look 2 years out with some of the products I've seen, this will really work. And China has some of the biggest communities in the world. And I think if you look at communities in general, what you start seeing is you start looking at the whole world moving towards communities. Some of my customers in the US, in my job as a US sales lead, like Google and Microsoft and Amazon and a lot of these companies we sell products to, and nearly all of these companies are talking about going open with their code that they want to use, providing open source, which doesn't make sense when you're thinking about companies wanting to create products that are open source. That's their IP. But they see it benefiting the masses and ecosystems growth. And what you're seeing is, from GitHub all the way across Linux, FreeRTOS, is the ability to have free code and support for that code in a timely manner when you have a critical mass of people answering those questions. I think the last big technical trend that is, I see definitely in the US, it's been evident here in China for a long time, is the reliance on IDHs and the utilization of IDHs more and more. What you're seeing is a lot of people in tech who are not necessarily engineers coming up with fantastic ideas that don't have the engineering resources to be able to support or create the product that they want, and are now leaning on independent design houses. Distribution is also creating more, distributors are creating more of a independent design house kind of leg of all of their operations. And what you're seeing for someone like a supplier, a Silicon Labs, is we don't have hundreds of customers to support anymore. We support 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 IDHs who then support the customers. So again, it's less support needed for us on a field basis to the customer. So to try to tie everything together that I've just been talking about, because there's been a lot of different directions, if you really summate it and pull it into one kind of big market trend, you have the business trends and the technical trends. You have margin pressure. You have sales force dilution, becoming less technical, less capable to support the customers. You have Chinese companies exporting overseas. And you have the emergence of IC markets. Where this is moving to for distribution in China is it's moving to the big global companies like the Arrow, Avnet, Futures becoming more fulfillment and more operational and less demand creation support at a field level. You get these big, broad distributors that are now focusing more on design services to add value for their customers and also for the suppliers. You also have the emergence of APAC distributors on a worldwide platform, and you have the growth of non-traditional online silicon sales channels like the Alibabas of the world, like, I guess Taobao is already there, but other methods that now are able to support customers because of the technical trends that are happening, is that customers don't need to talk to a field-based technical resource because the resources in the coming years are getting better, that they don't need to have that face-to-face interaction. And I think the online search and really the out-designing is just really allowing any customers to be able to really create and get support for a design with basically online or with basically online support. So if we kind of look through all the different kind of all the different distributor kind of categories that we talked about at the beginning, all the way from the worldwide distributors, Asia, China distributors, the global online, APAC, and then other, you start seeing over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years of where I believe, this isn't a perfect science, but where I believe these different entities are moving towards. I believe the Arrow Avnet futures of the world are moving to a world where their margins are becoming so pressured that they're moving to a fulfillment model where it's less demand creation and it's more operational support of customers on a worldwide basis. I think for the Asia distributors, I think they already have margin models today that support fulfillment models on the worldwide basis, comparing them to the global distributors. I think you have those Asia distributors really creating a larger footprint worldwide and really making inroads at businesses and locations for fulfillment services that they haven't seen before. I see a large growth in that. I think for the Chinese distributors, if you look at the very first slide I showed you, or at least the second slide I showed you, the China regional distributors actually add some of the most value today for a supplier. But because of consolidation and because really economies of scale of the larger distributors, I see a lot of those smaller distributors being consolidated or purchased or absorbed into those bigger Asia distributors. Unfortunately, I see that as a trend. Primarily, I even see a lot of it from in the last 1 or 2 years in consolidation, where a lot of the smaller Chinese distributors are moving more towards design services and are then being acquired into bigger distributors. I see the online distributors, the DigiKey Mausers. I think they'll be successful. They are growing. I see the growth slowing, and I see the growth slowing primarily because they have good penetration with large OEMs, generally more worldwide OEMs. But I think at a local level, it's challenging shipping. It's challenging because it's been shipped from the US, cost-wise, to really compete with Asia and China indigenous suppliers, online suppliers. I think the APAC online distributors who are also having an online store, I don't think they're going to reach the economies of scale over time to be able to compete, especially when they're going to be competing with people like Alibaba and Taobao. And Alibaba now is obviously just a storefront. They do not have the distribution capability of semiconductor yet, but similar to Amazon in the US, have already started semiconductor lines that they're selling online. And when you don't need someone to come to your office, why would you need anything else but online operational supply from these different vendors? So I think really in summary, what I see really the next chapter happening is global distributors really focusing on demand creation via online, or excuse me, via design services model, where they're able to add more value, really getting customers to the next step technically and offloading customers' technical support. I see the Asia distributors, they're going to win the global battle in the medium to long term, primarily because they have, again, margin models that support that today, and they can roll those margin models, which are generally lower than the big globals, out in fulfillment models and still be profitable. And I think then, really, the big winner for the long tail or the mass market is online. In the next 5 to 10 years, I have no question that engineers will prefer not to talk to people, and if they have the resources online to be able to get what they need, there's no reason why an Alibaba or similar entities will be able to fulfill that need. And I think that's an opportunity. I think that's an opportunity for a lot of people in this room. I think it's an opportunity for the distribution network today to try to invest ahead. And obviously Arrow, I've seen really doing a lot of investment in this space, and Avnet as well, and a lot of the local distributors. But I think knowing what you're up against is the only way that you can actually be successful. And I think thinking about the online model and how to satisfy that and combine some of these online models with communities and technical support will create a portal that engineers don't have today that still needs to be created. And I think that's the opportunity. That was the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.